Shocking truth, Millionaire CEO tracks down janitor who took leftovers at 3 a.m. The bright lights of the corporate skyscraper flickered ominously as the clock struck midnight. Inside, deep within the polished confines of New York tech, a secret was stirring. The aroma of gourmet food clung to the air like a ghost, tantalizing, yet haunting. Buried amidst cold, leftover truffle risottos and lobster mac and cheese was something darker, a mystery waiting to be uncovered. Who was this midnight scavenger dipping into the riches others wasted? In the shadows of the sleek boardroom, far from the prying eyes of the office's elite, a janitor named Frank quietly rolled his cart. He was a simple man, always smiling, with a story in his eyes that no one bothered to ask about. Yet tonight, that smile frayed a bit as he heard a faint rustle. It echoed like a siren song, calling him closer to the leftovers he so despised wasted. As he opened the door to the break room, his pulse quickened. Tucked away behind the fancy bamboo plants was a half-eaten dessert, glistening under fluorescent lights, untouched by the arrogance of wealth. Out of nowhere, footsteps echoed against the cold, tiled floor. Frank froze, his heart raced as he turned toward the impending footsteps. The CEO himself, Anthony Reed, the man who turned a tech startup into an empire, stepped in. Draped in crisp designer suits, he was an imposing figure, but his eyes, cold and calculating, were locked onto the half-eaten plate. Frank's chest tightened, lump forming in his throat as their gazes clashed. Had he been caught? Would he be fired for taking what was left behind? Anthony's face twisted into a mix of confusion and rage as he spotted Frank. "You," he pointed, voice like ice, "what are you doing here?" The atmosphere crackled with tension, every breath filling with dread as it dawned on Frank the leftovers weren't some simple indulgence. No, they had become part of a deeper conspiracy, and he had just stepped right into the middle of it. What sinister plot lay behind those exquisite meals that echoed of excess? Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. Just as silence enveloped them, Frank noticed a flash of something behind Anthony's steely demeanor, a flicker of fear. Was it anger? The question spun like wildfire in his mind. Frank couldn't shake the feeling that he was entangled in something far beyond mere leftovers. He took a tiny step back, breath hitching. Why was the CEO prowling the halls at such a bizarre hour? Was it really just about salvaging a fancy meal, or was his empire slipping through the cracks? And if Frank was caught in the middle, what was at stake for him? The room darkened as the tension thickened, an invisible line had been drawn. Frank hesitated, trapped between truth and survival, wondering what fate awaited him now. Would the CEO unleash his wrath over a plate of cold pasta, or would he expose something far more chilling? The night was far from over, and Frank had no idea of the true depths he was about to plunge into. Frank's breath hitched in his throat. The air felt stifling, as if the dark shadows around them loomed closer. Anthony's gaze bore down on him, cold and demanding. Just a few steps separated them, but a chasm of power stretched wider than the polished floor. "Please," I was just, Frank stammered, scrambling for the right words. He didn't mean to intrude. He never wanted to become a spectacle. But there he stood, a mere janitor caught in the looming presence of a titan. "Do you ever think about what you're doing, Frank?" Anthony's voice dripped with disdain. "You think you can just walk in here and take what doesn't belong to you?" The images of his meager paycheck floated in Frank's mind, scraping against the surface like the grit on his cleaning cart. He felt foolish, a thief in the night, but the truth was, he had hoped to see something, anything more than just soulless leftovers. He started again, but the words twisted in his throat. Suddenly, Anthony's posture shifted. The cold facade cracked for just a moment, revealing a flicker of something, maybe vulnerability. Frank squinted, trying to decipher the storm behind the CEO's eyes. "Don't lie to me," Anthony barked, snapping Frank from his thoughts. "You think those scraps are all you're worth? You know it's not just food in those containers, don't you?" The weight of suspicion pressed down heavily. Frank's heart racing, he felt like a deer caught in headlights. His instincts screamed to flee, but his feet felt glued to the floor, locked in a confrontation he never sought. "What do you mean?" he managed to croak. "I see you every night," Anthony narrowed his eyes, "but you don't belong here. These meetings, the dinners, they mean something. You're not supposed to know." The words spun in the air, biting with the chill of a winter storm. Frank's pulse thundered in his ears. Was it a mere scrap of leftover food, or was it a door into a world hidden from him? What had he stumbled upon? He shifted his weight, leaning in slightly, craving answers but terrified of what the truth might embroil. "You don't understand the game." Anthony leaned closer, an ominous aura wrapping around him like smoke. "There are secrets buried here that could collapse everything. Just one misplaced item can unravel decades of trust and power." Frank swallowed hard, the lump now a solid knot. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "I want to know if I can trust you," Anthony said, voice low but laced with intensity. "You're a witness to something much larger than you realize. And if the wrong people find out you've been lurking around lurking?" Frank felt the sting of indignation wash over him. "I'm just a janitor." "Exactly," Anthony hissed, frustration radiating from him like heat. "You're ignored. You can go places I can't, see things I can't. If the truth escapes, it might cost us all." Frank's mind raced. What truth? He'd only wanted to nibble on a leftover treat. Yet, as he stared into the depths of Anthony's gaze, he recognized the stakes had escalated beyond just an empty plate of mac and cheese. "Why not?" he mumbled, shaking his head. "I'm no one. I can't help you." Anthony stepped closer, almost invading Frank's space, his eyes aflame. "You don't get it. Everyone in this building has something to hide but you," he pointed sharply. "You might be the key. You're not just a janitor, you're the wild card." What had he gotten himself into? Before Frank could wrestle with words, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Heavy and unforgiving, they grew closer. The tension snapped around them. Anthony straightened, an icy mask returning as he hissed, "They can't know what we spoke about. You need to decide right now, will you help me or be the reason it all crumbles?" The door swung open to reveal a shadowy figure, the faint outline growing clearer. Frank's heart raced. He was standing on a turning point with consequences that reached every corner of the skyscraper. "Time to choose," Anthony intoned, tension hanging thick in the air. Who was coming? What secrets were turning the night darker? Frank's world was spinning, and he could feel the abyss calling his name. The figure stepping through the door was tall, dressed in a dark suit that shimmered under the overhead lights. As they took a step closer, Frank's stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't just anyone about to enter, this was someone connected. "Anthony," the newcomer said, voice smooth as silk but laced with a sharp edge. It was Melina, the operations manager. Her eyes darted between the two men, curiosity sparking in her gaze. "What is going on here?" "Just a moment of clarification," Anthony replied, straightening his jacket, his tone shifting into a rehearsed calm. Frank could see the tension in his shoulders, a thin line stretched tightly under the pressure of her presence. "Need me to clear something out?" Melina asked, her brow furrowing as she crossed her arms. "No, it's all good here," Anthony responded quickly, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. The image of a commanding king, ready to battle for his kingdom, flashed through Frank's mind. He wondered if he was a pawn caught in the middle of a game more intricate than he had ever imagined. Melina's gaze remained on Frank, a mixture of intrigue and suspicion glittering beneath her professional facade. "And what about him?" She shifted her gaze to Anthony, a challenge simmering in her voice. You know we can't just have anyone wandering these halls at this hour. I was just Frank stumbled over his own excuses, words falling like leaves in autumn. There was no sense in lying now. Doing your job, Anthony finished for him, a slight smirk curling his lips, and Frank felt the shame wash over him. Nothing more. But was that really the case? The notion of being more than invisible was both thrilling and terrifying. Right. Just a janitor, Melina replied, her skepticism thickening the air. But something about him feels off. Frank's heart pounded as their gazes locked. He hadn't planned to be part of this confrontation, and yet here he was, the focal point of an unraveling drama. Frank's got potential, Anthony countered, eyes boring into Melina's. How often do we hear and see the world from the bottom up? He might be a perfect addition to the crew. A crew? Melina scoffed. A janitor? Have you lost your mind? This isn't a charity. Frank's breath quickened. Was Anthony really trying to use him as some sort of intel? He could feel the dissonance crackling around him like static electricity. Right now, Melina, we need every advantage we can get. Anthony's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. If anyone knows how the underbelly of this place operates, it's someone who has lived and breathed it from the shadows. Frank's pulse raced. The shadows. Was he really that nameless, that hidden? There is something deeper at play, and Frank might just hold the key to it. Anthony's voice tightened, a thin veneer of urgency creeping in. Frank felt the weight of that statement crash around him like thunder. The tension around them thickened, like smoke curling in the air. Frank? Melina turned her piercing gaze back to him. What exactly have you seen? The clock seemed to tick loudly in the silence, drawing out the suspense like a taut rubber band ready to snap. Frank could either reveal what he had caught glimpses of or keep his mouth shut and retreat into the shadows he called home. He stammered, words caught in a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. I haven't seen anything. I just clean up liar, Melina shot back, not one to be fooled easily. You think you can just walk away and pretend you haven't? Frank's thoughts raced as realization hammered down on him. They weren't just talking about leftovers anymore but a network, a potential maze of secrets that could lead to his ruin or salvation. Footsteps echoed again, this time more urgent, rattling the nerves clenched tightly inside of him. Frank's breath quickened as he thought of the precarious balance shifting beneath him. What comes next? He whispered, the question escaping before he could reel it back in. Once again, his gaze flicked back and forth between Anthony and Melina, their fates intertwined, just like his. Now you have to choose, Frank, Anthony said, his voice low, almost ominous. Who do you believe? And what do you dare to let slip? As if on cue, the ground beneath them trembled, and Frank sensed something dark drawing closer, like shadows casting in the periphery of his vision. Something's coming, he murmured, feeling the weight of the impending storm settling on him. Both Anthony and Melina exchanged knowing glances, but what were they preparing for, and what role would Frank play in it all? The air grew colder, the flickering lights overhead an insidious reminder of the tension brewing. What forces loomed on the horizon? And would he be the one to face them? The atmosphere thickened, wrapping around Frank like a suffocating fog. He barely had time to process the weight of that decision, the pressure mounting in his chest. But before he could say anything more, the sharp click of high heels echoed down the hall behind Melina, slicing through the tension like a knife. Melina! Came a familiar voice. It was Claire, the head of security. Frank's heart sank. Claire wasn't just any figure, she was the watchdog of this whole operation, conducting her work with a precision sharper than the jagged edge of a broken glass. And she had her sights set now. Emergency meeting in 15, we need to discuss the leaks, Claire rushed as she entered the room, her eyes narrowing upon seeing the trio. What's happening here? Melina exchanged a fleeting glance with Anthony, who quickly smoothed his face into an unbothered mask. Nothing we can't handle. Just a discussion on operational levels, he replied, his tone unnervingly calm. but Claire wasn't having it. That's not how it looks to me. And Frank, her gaze locked with his, questioning, assessing, vulnerable. You shouldn't be here. You know how sensitive it is right now. Frank's heart raced like a runaway train. What did she know? Did she suspect him of lurking in the shadows? The shadows that Anthony spoke of? He instinctively took a step back, but found his back pressed against the doorframe behind him. There was no escape. Sorry, Frank, but I can't have any loose ends, Claire continued, her voice all business. Frank felt his face flush. Was he the loose end? Loose ends? Melina scoffed, taking a step forward. Are we really going there? You think letting paranoia run wild is the answer? Maybe we should focus on the real traitors around here. Frank's chest tightened as he felt the brewing storm escalate. Did they really think he was in the middle of this tangled web? Did they see the potential he hardly felt? Anthony suddenly cleared his throat, breaking the rising tension. Let us keep this professional, Claire, he said nonchalantly. Frank was just cleaning the floors. Nothing more. The weight of those words clamored around him like heavy chains, squeezing tighter with every passing second. Would nothing more indeed protect him from whatever forces were looming? I'm not buying it, Claire shot back, her eyes narrowing. I've seen what happens to those who tread too close to the truth. You either keep your distance, or you dive headfirst into danger. Her voice seemed to drop an octave, mixing authority with a hint of warning. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, buzzing as if in warning. Frank's mind raced. If Claire was on to something, what did he face next? The swirling possibilities threatened to overtake him. Frank, Melina's voice softened slightly, shifting the tension again. What exactly have you seen? You might be able to help us. The weight of their scrutiny was unbearable now. His mind raced to pieces he had gathered during late-night shifts. The hushed conversations and the odd crates hidden in the back rooms. Was it enough to speak up? He hesitated, but the urgency in their eyes complicated everything. If sensing his turmoil, Claire stepped closer. You need to decide if you want to be a bystander or a player in this game. Because once you're in, there's no way out. You understand that, don't you? Frank gulped, feeling the gravity of her words. The ground beneath him felt unstable, like quicksand ready to pull him down. Then came the heavy pounding of footsteps, echoing closer through the hallway. Several figures were rushing this way, urgency taxing the air even further. What the hell? Anthony began, but was cut off as the door burst open. The new figures flooded in, faces tense and frantic. We've got a breach, one of them shouted, eyes darting nervously around the room. An unknown vehicle just pulled up outside. It's bad news. Panic surged in an uncontainable wave as the implications sank in. Frank felt a tightening knot of dread form in his stomach. This wasn't just a strategic game anymore. It was life and death. Get the lockdown protocols going. Everyone out. Claire barked, her authority slicing through the chaos with military-like precision. As they scrambled for cover, Frank felt a pull towards the shadows. He could either choose to hide and avoid confrontation or step into the fray, risk exposing everything he knew, and perhaps save himself. He glanced at Anthony and Melina. Underneath their cool exteriors, he sensed their shared fear. Would they stand together against whatever dark force approached? Or would it only deepen the divide? Frank! Anthony shouted, urgency igniting in his voice. Make your choice, go now. Frank's heart pounded as he weighed his decision, feeling the pull of either action or retreat as the footsteps echoed ever closer. All eyes were on him. What would he do? And would it lead him straight into a trap? Frank inhaled sharply, the scent of sweat and fear mingling in the air. He felt trapped, each second stretching longer than the last. The room buzzed with chaos as frantic silhouettes rushed past him, but all he could focus on were the choices weighing heavily on his mind. Frank! Melina's voice sliced through the noise, pulling him back from the brink of indecision. We can't leave you here. He looked at her, desperation etched on her face. There was a flicker of loyalty in her eyes, a hint that perhaps their fates were intertwined. Anthony's steady gaze further assured him he wasn't in this alone, not yet. But Claire's chilling orders echoed in his mind. Each heartbeat hammered the reality of the moment into his bones. This wasn't just some casual workplace argument, this was a confrontation with shadows creeping closer by the second. Another crash reverberated outside, punctuating the air with the promise of violence. "We don't have time, Frank," Anthony urged again. "Trust your instincts." The walls felt like they were closing in. The quickening of his breath made his chest tighten. He had seen enough to know that the stakes were deadly high, yet here he stood, a mere janitor entangled in a web of deceit that could swallow him whole. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to flee, but another part of him craved to uncover the truth. What secrets lay hidden within this operation? What lay behind those shadows that loomed, forged from whispered conversations and locked doors? "Go," Claire growled, losing patience. The urgency in her voice was sharpening. "Move, Frank." Adrenaline surged through him, and he nodded sharply. "I'm with you." In that instant, he chose to stand with them, to step away from the safety of the shadows and into the chaos. Melina stepped alongside him, and Anthony mirrored their resolve. Together, they formed a small fortress against the fear creeping back in. "Stick together," Anthony commanded, leading the charge as they ducked past the doorframe and into the corridor. The chaotic sounds of heavy boots thudded closer, accompanied by muffled grunts and shouts that sent chills down Frank's spine. They moved fast, a trio navigating through the chaos, each corner turned revealing the unfolding darkness of the situation. Frank caught fleeting glimpses of faces, some panic-stricken, others grimly determined, all part of a fractured team grappling with an unseen threat. "Cut through the break room," Melina shouted, turning sharply to the right, her voice ringing with certainty. They followed her lead, driven by the instinct to survive as the sound of chaos grew louder. Inside, empty cans and discarded coffee cups lay strewn about like abandoned memories. "Where's the exit?" Frank asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Through that door," Melina pointed, just as a deafening crash erupted, shaking the building's foundation. They turned their heads, fear pooling in their eyes. The door at the far end was dully lit but seemed like their only hope. Frank's feet propelled him forward, putting distance between them and the noise. He felt the warm breath of urgency on his neck, pushing him to run for his life. As they approached the door, another shout echoed from behind a voice they recognized. "Stop! Don't go in there!" Claire's cry rang out, sharp and commanding, but it was too late. Frank threw open the door, and they tumbled through. Suddenly, they found themselves in the supply room, boxes piled high, compartments of forgotten supplies. It was dim and quiet, a stark contrast to the brewing storm outside. "Do we hide?" Frank panted, scanning the room for any sign of escape. "No. We need to find a way to stop them," Anthony insisted, aggression lighting up his eyes. "It's time to take back control." Frank felt their collective resolve hanging in the air, heavy and electric. Was he truly ready to dive deeper into this whirlwind? Would abandoning the shadows lead to salvation or demise? As he peered through the narrow window, the surreal scene outside unfurled, a squad of dark figures advancing towards their refuge, freedom and danger, dangerously close in tandem. "Frank!" Melina's voice broke his concentration. "What's your play?" The weight of her question hit hard, each word anchoring him. It felt monumental, a moment that could ripple into endless possibilities. Before he could answer, the ground beneath them shook violently, throwing them off balance. They stumbled backward as the lights flickered ominously above. "What the hell was that?" Anthony shouted, his voice laced with panic. Frank's breath caught in his throat. Was this the moment everything unraveled? He realized they were facing ominous choices that could seal their fates. As the shadows began to invade the room, heavy footsteps echoing like a death knell. One thing slipped into Frank's mind: there was no turning back now. And as the dim light flickered one last time, Frank braced for what awaited them. Would he rise to the occasion? Or would he crumble under the weight of his choices? The last echo of a heavy boot fell, distinct and final. The door groaned under the pressure, revealing a pair of eyes starving for answers. "Let us see how deep this rabbit hole goes," Frank whispered, realizing the stakes had never been higher. But little did he expect what would emerge from the dark. The door creaked on its hinges, and in that fragile moment, time seemed to freeze. Frank's heart skipped a beat as the figure came into focus. Claire's tense face stood inches from the intruder, her breath audibly quickening. A man loomed in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, eyes glinting with a dangerous intelligence. His clothes were crisp, too crisp for this environment, and a smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "Well, well, what do we have here?" He waved a finger, mimicking the gesture of a child caught sneaking cookies. Disdain dripped from his voice like venom. "Get back!" Claire shouted, stepping protectively in front of Frank and the others, her body rigid, a line drawn in defiance. The man chuckled, undeterred by her fierce stance. "You think you're safe here? This isn't a game." Frank's breath came in short, sharp bursts. He knew this man. Rumors swept through the corridors he was linked to the company's dirty dealings, a ghost haunting their every move, watching, waiting. "What do you want?" Frank managed to say, words sticking in his throat, heavy with fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of a precipice, one step away from unraveling something much larger than himself. What sacrifice had brought them to this critical moment? "We're here for the information," the man said smoothly, but Frank could see the flicker of menace in his eyes. "And you, my friend, are in way over your head." "My question still stands," Melina said, shooting Frank a glance that pleaded for action, to do something, anything. But what could he do against this looming threat? Each second stretched painfully. "Our operation is not to be trifled with," the man continued, stepping closer. The doorframe seemed to shrink under his imposing presence. "But you can make this easier for yourself, come with me." A crack of movement outside the window caught Frank's attention. He turned for a split second, panic flickering like the dying bulbs above. Had their escape been out of sight? He couldn't afford to lose focus. "We're not going anywhere with you," Anthony barked, arms folded defiantly. "Oh, but you will," the man replied, undeterred as the shadows behind him shifted, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. They were cornered, trapped in a dimly lit room with a relentless foe and a growing storm outside. Frank could feel the weight of despair settling over them. "We can fight," he whispered fiercely, adrenaline coursing through him. It was a raw, reckless thought, but he couldn't let fear win. Melina nodded slightly, determination igniting the depths of her eyes. "We can't back down. Not now." Just as the man stepped toward them, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat that felt eternal. A jolt of urgency surged through Frank. He surged forward, ready to confront this enemy, heart pounding like a war drum. But then a deafening crash resounded from behind the intruder. The supply room shuddered as the door exploded off its hinges, revealing shadowy silhouettes pouring in. Too late. The man's voice quivered, perhaps betraying an edge of fear. Chaos erupted. Frank's instincts kicked in. He shoved Melina backward, forcing her to move. "Run!" he shouted as the deep, threatening growls of advancing figures echoed through the broken doorway. In that moment, clarity pierced his fear. They had a choice, to run or to face the thunderous unknown. He glanced behind, seeing the flicker of dread on Melina's face mixed with determination in Anthony's. "This way!" Frank shouted, pointing to a narrow gap behind a stack of boxes leading further into the shadows. Driven by adrenaline, they bolted toward the opening, but not without weighing the costs of what lay ahead. Deep inside, Frank felt the shudder of consequences as daunting as the approaching figures behind them. As they slipped through the narrow passageway into the darkness, a final shout echoed behind them: "You can't hide forever." Frank knew then that they were being drawn into a much larger conflict, a looming truth that could either unify them or tear them apart. But one thing was certain: they had only just scratched the surface of the danger lying ahead. The darkness enveloped them like a thick fog, swallowing their cries and echoing their frantic footsteps. Frank felt the pulse of anxiety in his throat, thudding like a drum, as they hurried deeper into the unknown. The shadows around them were alive, shifting and swirling, filled with the remnants of fears they couldn't yet understand. "Where do we go?" Claire hissed, her voice a barely contained whisper, laced with desperation. Frank could feel her starter life surging into action. It was the spark they needed in this enveloping gloom. "Just keep moving," he urged, darting his head around every corner of the narrow path. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old wood, a reminder of the forgotten space they had rushed into. He cast a glance back to where they had come from. The faint flicker of light was fading, swallowed by the advancing darkness. Somewhere behind them, a low growl echoed, sending chills down Frank's spine. It was a harbinger of the threat relentlessly pursuing them, a reminder that danger was close, hunting them down. The narrow passageway twisted abruptly, and Frank felt the damp chill against his skin, a mental reminder of his reality. "There's no turning back," he thought, pushing down the swell of panic. Frank led the way, his mind racing as he searched for an exit, a plan, or anything resembling a chance of survival. They turned a corner and stumbled into a larger room. The faint light spilling in from a broken window illuminated a dozen crates stacked haphazardly, some tipped over, others sealed tight. "Look!" Melina exclaimed, pointing at a stack of crates. "We can hide there." Her determination fueled them. Frank's heart surged with hope. "Get in!" he hissed, shoving the nearest crate. It groaned from the weight but barely budged. They shoved themselves into the makeshift refuge. Claire was last, pushing the lid down lightly, letting the darkness envelop them completely. Heartbeats thundered in Frank's ears as he strained to hear the footsteps behind them. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. The only sound was their collective breathing, quick, anxious, the rhythm matching the pounding in Frank's chest. But then a noise broke through the silence: footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing just outside their hiding place. Frank froze, barely daring to breathe. Whatever was hunting them was close, aware of their presence, predatory. "Did they follow us?" Anthony whispered, his voice trembling. "Shoo! You'll give us away." Claire hissed back, wide eyes reflecting fear. Frank held his breath as the footsteps grew louder, pausing just outside the crate. A low voice spoke, rough and unyielding. "They have to be here somewhere. You lot think you can run? I will find you." The tension twisted painfully in Frank's stomach. Every moment stretched on like an hour. He could feel the weight of fear pressing down on him, threatening to snap him in half, but then there was a sudden crash, splintering a crate across the room. Shadows swarmed as a figure rushed about, and Frank's heart propelled him into action. "Now!" he commanded, shoving against the crate's lid. They burst out of their hiding place, adrenaline propelling them forward. Outside, chaos erupted. The figure that had been hunting them spun around, surprise flashing across his face. "Get them!" he bellowed, and panic surged in Frank's veins as they surged towards an exit at the far end. But just as they reached the door, a sweep of heavy footsteps drowned out their movement, casting a thick veil of despair. Frank felt an icy grip on the nape of his neck. "Stop!" the voice called, dripping with authority and malice. The moment froze. Where had the last line of hope gone? Just as Frank's thoughts spiraled into the abyss, he spotted an object glinting on the floor, a strange device, sleek and unknown. What if this held their salvation? But the figure was right behind them, closing in fast, and Frank had to choose to risk everything for a chance at escape, or ensure they weren't caught in the madness that threatened to ensnare them. The stakes rose higher than the walls around them. Would they uncover the shocking truth hidden in the shadows? Would they find a way out, or were they just stepping into an even darker fate? Frank inhaled sharply, foot ready to move. The answer awaited, all he needed was the resolve to find it. Frank's resolve solidified like iron. Instinct nudged him toward the glinting device, the only chance of survival they had. The heaviness of dread still weighed on him, but determination surged through his veins. He reached down, hoping against hope it would save them. "Go!" he shouted, hoping someone would hear him over the chaos. But the creature's growl echoed ominously in response, its breath hot against his skin. In a flash, he wrapped his fingers around the device, feeling its cold metal warmth seep into him, reminding him he had something tangible to fight back with. "Come on!" Claire urged, fear lighting up her face. She tugged at his arm, desperately pulling him toward the exit. The looming figure watched with predatory interest, a twisted grin creeping across his features. Frank, pulling himself from the weight of fear, sprinted towards the door at the far end of the room, Claire and the others right behind him. It was a faint glimmer of daylight beckoning them, a vulnerable moment of hope, completely overshadowed by instinctual dread. The menacing footsteps bore down, thudding darkly against the wooden floor. Frank risked a glance back and saw the figure lunging toward them, its movements fluid and terrifying. For a moment, adrenaline stalled his thoughts, but then a primal shout escaped his lips, "On 3." He counted down but could barely hear himself over the wild beat of his heart. 1, 2, 3. They bolted toward the sliver of freedom. Frank held the device close to his chest, praying it was more than just a catch for their captor. As they reached the doorframe, a deafening crash thundered behind them. Something heavy collided into the crates they had just left. The startled screech from Melina urged Frank to push harder, carrying his anxiety like a torch burning in the night. "Almost there. Keep running!" Frank yelled, his voice unsteady, but resolute. The door loomed closer, sunlight pouring through, illuminating their escape. It was a sliver of hope, a promise they desperately needed, but the figure was right behind them, insatiable, relentless. Frank felt a wave of cold wash over him, terror suffocating him as he reached the door finally. Just as he turned the rusty knob, a rough hand grazed his arm. "Stop!" The voice roared, that sickening blend of hunger and authority sending ice through Frank's veins. A flicker of instinct took over. He swung around, lifting the device above his head in defense. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice trembling yet fierce. The figure, momentarily startled, paused. Just long enough for Frank to hurl the device towards the figure. It landed with a clatter, rolling across the floor and skidding toward him. The moment stretched painfully. Would it help them, or had Frank just made things worse? The hunter's eyes narrowed, fury flickering dangerously as he lunged again, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. As the figure stumbled toward the device in a wild fury, Frank felt a surge of hesitation. Was this genuinely a tool for escape or an empty hope clutched in fear's grip? His friend stumbled past him, yanking the door wide open, the brilliant light flooding in. "What are you doing?" Anthony shouted, urgency dripping from his words. "Go! I can't just leave!" Frank roared, torn between the fight and the flight. "Frank!" Claire's voice softened beneath the panic. "You have to trust us. We can't leave you behind. Just move." But did he trust them enough? Did he trust himself, now faced with the looming threat dividing life and death? With a final glance back, Frank felt a pulse of resolution wash over him again. Would he leap into that light a step toward escape or take one last stand against the monster that had chased them through the darkness? He inhaled sharply, heart racing, the decision hanging heavy in the air. The choice would mark them, the darkness or the light lay ahead. What would he choose when the moment of truth arrived? Frank launched himself into the blinding light, just as the shadow lunged again. He barely felt the breath of the creature skate past him as he dove through the doorway, pulling Claire and the others behind him. The sudden burst of sunlight washed over him like a cleansing wave, mingling with the stench of fear that still clung to his skin. They fell onto the grass outside, gasping for air, bathed in the warmth of a new day, but terror still clawed at Frank's throat. "Look out!" Melina shouted, pointing back toward the dim doorway they had just escaped. Instinctively, Frank turned his head, but it was too late. The figure surged through the door, its silhouette dark against the light. It leered at them, wide-eyed and panting, its presence a nightmare made flesh as it surveyed its prey. "Run!" Frank yelled, instinctively leaping to his feet, dragging Claire after him. He sprinted toward the forest line that bordered the property, adrenaline turning his legs to steel. Each stride pulsed with urgency as they dashed past trees, their foliage vibrant and alive yet dishearteningly unlike their impending doom. "What about the device?" Claire gasped, her hair flying wildly behind her. "What did you even throw?" Frank's mind raced, trying to draw an image of the glinting object in his head. Could it have been a weapon? A trap? Or worse, a key to something much more sinister? "I don't know," he shouted back, his voice harsh against the sounds of their pounding feet. "Just keep moving." They barreled deeper into the woods, branches scratching their arms and legs, the sun now cloaked by a canopy of leaves above. Each moment felt drawn out, time stretching painfully as they sought refuge from the beast behind them. But then, a deep rumble disrupted their shadows. Frank skidded to a halt, heart racing as he turned to face Claire and the others. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently, a booming sound reverberating through the air like distant thunder. "Do you feel that?" Anthony asked, eyes wide as he glanced around in alarm. "Yeah, it's getting closer," Melina murmured, a tremor evident in her voice. Frank's gut sank. "We need to find somewhere to hide now." He pushed them forward, ducking beneath low-hanging branches, scanning for any refuge. Suddenly, from the underbrush, a familiar glint caught his eye. It was the device. It had rolled just ahead, nestled in the thick tangled roots of an ancient tree. "Wait!" Frank yelled, bolting toward it despite Claire's protests. "Frank, don't!" she cried, but he had already reached down, fingers wrapping around the cool metal. He felt a jolt pulse through him, like electricity sparking in his veins. As he stood, the ground quaked again, this time more violently, the echoes sounding like a chorus of anguished cries. The shrieking once again of the creature on the hunt reached their ears, clearer than before. "Frank, we have to go." Claire's voice cut through his trance, panic flaring in her eyes. "We can't stay here." Torn between the discovery of the device, its potential and promise, and the urgency of escape, Frank hesitated. "What if this thing can stop it?" he murmured, glancing down at the device, feeling an irrational yet undeniable connection to it. Frank's mind spun with possibilities and fears. A shadow flickered behind them, pulling him back to reality. "Frank!" The loud roar of the creature echoed, snapping him back to the moment. With a deep breath, he shoved the device into his pocket, adrenaline surging as he yelled, "Go, go, go!" They scrambled deeper into the woods, hearts racing and pulses hammering, unsure of how far they would need to run to escape the darkness closing in around them. The moment weighed heavily in Frank's mind, the device's secrets fresh and pulsing with power. Behind them, the forest was alive with sounds, branches breaking, panting breaths, the voice of their pursuer a relentless echo in the shadows. Could they outpace it long enough to discover what the device could truly do? What legacy had it borne within it? But just as they thought they might be free, the ground began to crack. Again, a gaping fissure ripping open, widening with every heartbeat. "Not again!" Frank screamed, pulling Claire back just in time, the earth crumbling away before them like a breath of despair. "Frank, what do we do?" Claire shouted, her voice trembling. The shadows deepened, drawing their eyes back toward their relentless pursuer. They needed to fight, not just flee. But would they have the strength to face the truth that lurked behind the darkness? He tightened his grip on the device, feeling heat surge through it, pulsing with each dangerous step. The choice lay before them, fight or flight. With resolve, Frank turned back to his friends, determination melting fear into action. Would they discover the true power of the device, or would they fall into the abyss? It seemed time was running out. Frank's heart pounded like a jackhammer as he stood with Claire, Anthony, and Melina at the edge of the chasm. The earth had torn open, revealing a darkness below that made the shadows behind them seem inviting by comparison. Desperation clung to him like sweat. This was at the moment of truth. "Frank," Claire urged, her voice laced with urgency. "What are we going to do?" He could feel the ground shifting beneath them, hear the distant roars of whatever hunted them. Every second felt like an eternity. He gripped the device tightly in his pocket, its pulse a reminder that in his hands rested perhaps their only hope for survival. "Listen to me," Frank said, stealing glances at the chasm. "We can't let it win. This thing," he nodded toward the device, "it might be the key. We need to figure out what it does." "Figure it out? We're about to be devoured," Melina shouted, panic flickering in her eyes. "Frank, we could die." "No," he snapped, adrenaline surging through him, drawing strength from within. "We're not giving up." The shadows were closing in, and an icy voice echoed in his mind. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for him. "How can we trust it? You pulled it from the dark. What if it's a trap?" "I don't know, but it's got to be worth a shot," he replied, urgency clawing at his insides. "If we don't try something, we'll die. Together. Do you think it can stop that thing?" Anthony asked, his eyes darting between Frank and the dark mass looming behind them. "It has to be better than walking into that abyss," Frank said, thrusting his chin forward. The ground shook again, sending tremors up his legs. "Now, do you all trust me?" There was a brief moment of silence hanging heavy in the air, filled with uncertainty and fear. "Yes," Claire shouted finally, a fierce glint sparkling in her eyes. That was enough for Frank. "Then on three we fight." They all nodded. Frank's voice rang out. 1, 2, 3. Frank whipped the device from his pocket, golden sunlight glinting off its polished surface. The darkness swirling around them stirred in response to its presence as if sensing the power hidden inside. He raised it, heart racing. "What do you do?" he whispered, grappling with fear and responsibility as he felt the weight of his friend's trust. The hunters were nearing, and chaos flickered like flames in his mind. It was now or never. "Remember the pattern from the stories?" Melina blurted. "It might mean something." Frank's brow furrowed in concentration, recalling the stories of how ancient artifacts possessed great power when wielded by the right intent. "Everyone focus!" he roared, adrenaline surging through him like electricity. "We need to believe in it." They braced against the wall, standing strong together. Frank closed his eyes, seeking the connection, bonding with the device as a growing hum surrounded them, almost musical, resonating with the beating of their hearts. The entity prowling toward them let out a deep growl, echoing across the clearing like thunder. "Now!" Frank shouted. The shadows converged as the device pulsed violently, illuminating the darkness in blinding light. He pressed the button, pouring every ounce of hope and determination into the device, feeling the power surge between them as it gave a resonant response. "Let us go!" Frank yelled, plunging the device forward with abandon, and the night erupted into a kaleidoscope of colors and energy. The shadows recoiled, retreating from the light as if it was a fire they feared to touch. Frank felt a wave of warmth break over him, a protective shield wrapping around them. The entity howled, its form shrinking, twisting in agony as it was pushed back by an unseen force, banished into the dark crevices of the world they once feared. "Keep pushing!" Melina screamed, her voice filled with power and defiance. Together, they focused on the device, pouring their strength into it, connecting through unwavering loyalty and faith. Gradually, the howls faded, and the shadows receded, surrendering to the light. Then, silence fell, heavy and still. Frank opened his eyes, breathing hard, trembling with exhaustion. The breeze rustled through the trees, warmth enveloped them, spilling light into the forest like a healing balm. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, heart still racing. The device lay quietly in Frank's palm, its shine dulled but pulsating softly, a reminder of the battle fought and won. "We did it," Claire whispered, blinking back tears, "we actually did it." "Yeah," Anthony added, adjusting his glasses with a shaky smile. "We took back our lives." Melina hugged Frank tightly, her laughter bubbling over like a soda shaken too hard. "You led us through the darkest night and into the dawn." Frank smiled, feeling the weight of uncertainty and self-doubt lift. They had survived, bonded, transformed by the darkness they had faced together. "For every monster, a light," Frank replied, left with a newfound understanding of the shadows and the power of unity. As they stood together beneath the sun, Frank felt the pulse of the city beyond the trees. Each of them had played a part in keeping their secrets safe, spinning a web woven not with fear but with fierce friendship. And in the end, the shadows had lost, but as they turned to leave, Frank's eyes snagged on the horizon. The future loomed ahead, danger and the unknown still lurked beyond the glimmer of dawn. He steeled himself, knowing they were far from finished. "Time to go back," he said, determination igniting in his chest. "We have a lot to do." And as they walked toward the city, a sense of promise stretched out before them, ready to be written in the pages of their lives. Now folks, if you enjoyed this wild ride and want to keep this energy going, you need to subscribe now. Don't let this be the last you hear of these stories. Smash that like button now to fuel the algorithm and bring more adventures your way. And hey, flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this thrilling conclusion. Let's get that conversation started. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see the finale. Your support makes all the difference, and we can't do it without true fans like you.